Okay, everyone, welcome to this episode of my show. I'm Landon Sikahema, the host of the show, and for the guests for today's show, we have my good personal friend, Dylan Michael Beatty, PhD. He graduated with his PhD in geography from University of Hawaii 3.5 years ago. So now it's Dr. Dylan Michael Beatty. Dr. Beatty, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thank you, Landon Sikahema. Yeah, I guess it's already been 3.5 years. That's bizarre. Are you advertising for Kirkland Water or something?
Advertising for what?
Kirkland Water.
Oh, I guess. Not on
Yeah,
purpose,
thanks for
but
having me on. It's good to finally record something because you and I, I guess you and I connected really just because we talk about a bunch of sort of nerdy stuff and different topics and research, and we just have these long phone conversations. So it's kind of cool that we're finally recording. So I'll start by sharing. I'm going to share a PowerPoint on what I've done when I was in the Philippines. Is that cool?
yeah. I just want to talk about, some of your accolades real quick, some of your many accolades. He's a visiting research fellow in the Department of Geography at the University of the Philippines in Diliman. He's a research affiliate at Palawan State University in the Philippines. He's a graduate degree fellow at the East-West Center, University of Hawaii and Phi Alpha Theta. And yeah, again, he got his PhD in geography at the University of Hawaii 3.5 years ago. Before that, he got his bachelor's degree in history at Rutgers, and he also got his master's degree in geography at the University of Hawaii. And so today, this will be the first of a series of episodes that we'll film together covering his PhD dissertation, which took place mostly in the Philippines, but it kind of takes place, in the South China Sea in general. And he's going to break it down, and he's going to talk about, his amazing PhD dissertation, which is a very, very significant, current event in progress. It's kind of a heated debate, but go ahead and break it down and start, Doctor.
Not sure if I would say amazing, but I think it's interesting. I also, some of this was actually written in Hong Kong as well, at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. That was a cool experience. So let me get to where we are. It's been a while since I used Zoom. It's like from my pandemic days. Are you, can you see my screen now? With the fishes and everything?
Okay, we see it now.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So my research, I'll just get into it. It's broadly about the Spratly Island dispute in Southeast Asia, maritime Southeast Asia, within the broader South China Sea. And I would say probably easily a few hundred people, scholars have already written about this, so it's not novel. So I try to find something novel about it, right? And what I notice is everybody's overlooking the actual, not everybody, but at the time when I started this project, there was nobody published speaking about the people directly affected by the dispute. It was everything published was top down, macro level, looking at the state level perspective. And all those things are important, but they're overlooking the people who are actually living through this dispute as well. And I'll explain the dispute, of course, but this picture is actually from my fieldwork in the southern province of Palawan in the Philippines. And these are some of the people who are essentially what I term is experiencing the everyday geopolitics of this incredibly complex geopolitical dispute in maritime Southeast Asia, South China Sea, and the Spratly Islands more specifically.
So again, to be clear, one of the really, it's been written about before you, but one of the significant contributions that you really make to this, correct me if I'm wrong, is the fact that you're not just looking at it from the perspective of, the politicians and lawmakers in different countries who call the shots. You're really emphasizing the perspectives of the everyday, people who have to live through this and deal with this, on a regular basis because they live in these areas, correct?
That was my hope at the outset, and I don't want to make the claim that I'm the only person doing that because I was actually some other researchers reached out to me while I was in the field, so there were other people with a similar idea, but we didn't know of each other, if that makes sense, right? So
Yeah. But it is a significant part of your contribution, even if you're not the only person who's done it.
yeah, it was just cool to know that there's other people with a similar idea as well out there doing similar things, and I think we all sort of had the same idea at different sort of the same time. But yeah, that's the purpose of my research. However, you explain this incredibly complex geopolitical dispute. You have to look at it from the top down at times. So, especially through the law of the sea, and I'll explain that uh, in a little bit. But this dispute, again, is one of the most, I would argue, probably the second most complex dispute in terms of territorial disputes unfolding currently today. The only other one would be,
On the face of the earth.
I would say, I mean,
That's amazing. So yeah, this is, in your mind, the second most complex dispute, over the whole earth today, as far as what sovereignty and territory is concerned.
I could be wrong, but as far as I know, I mean, of course, an actual war going on in Ukraine. That's unbelievably complex. I don't want to minimize that and the issue in
Sure,
Palestine.
sure.
There's like tremendous complexities there. But in terms of how many people are involved in this dispute, in terms of like claimant states, 6 different countries are claiming these waters, right? So I think the only thing that rivals that are the current disputes over the Arctic region. So in the
Wow.
South China Sea, so this map is I'm going to show a lot of maps. I'm a geographer. I'm always been a map nerd. So
Sounds
this
good.
area of water is in Southeast Asia and also borders sort of East Asia, South China Sea. So I'm focusing on specifically the Spratly Islands. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor on your end, or but the Spratly Islands, directly west of the Philippines. And 6 different countries are claiming this broader sea area, and also 5 different claimant states are claiming specific spots in that Spratly Island group right there. And I conducted field work on that sliver of land directly to the east of that red dotted line there. So what this red dotted line is, this is China's and also Taiwan's claim to the South China Sea. And from what I understand, and again, this is unfolding, so I'm sure I'm out of date with current developments, but from what I understand, there's not a clear articulation of the logic behind that U-shaped line. It's baffled diplomats and researchers and scholars around the world for a while. But that's China's claim. And these blue lines are these are the exclusive economic zones. That's what they're called under the law of the sea, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So these blue dotted lines are the actual exclusive economic zones for each of the claimant states under the law of the sea. And I know if you look at this map for the first time, it looks complex, it looks disorienting, a cluttered jumble, massive lines. And it is at first glance, but if you look closer, it's really the purpose of this map is from a state perspective, the state political diplomatic perspective. It conveys the image that these space is ordered in an orderly manner. There's nothing controversial about this. There's just there's a complete lack of it's completely clear. There's clarity in these territorial claims. There's these clear, tidy blue lines. They're unambiguous, right? So this is the top-down state political elite narrative or fantasy rather of what space looks like in the South China Sea and maritime Southeast Asia. And I'll show you that it's far more complex than that. And in fact, it looks nothing like this in reality, in the everyday geopolitical reality of the people that live within this dispute. So again, the important part is 6 different countries are claiming these waters. It's unbelievably complex. And 5 different countries are claiming the specific islands that I focused on for my research, the Spratly Islands. And I'll say it a few times. The Spratly Islands are known in the Philippines oftentimes as Kalayaan, which is freedom. So that's
That word means freedom in what,
in Tagalog,
Tagalog?
yeah, in Tagalog, and that has a whole
Okay.
history to the region. There was this colorful Filipino entrepreneur that went out there back decades ago and declared it as freedom land. So there, in terms of linguistics, is that's the term freedom is Kalayaan is tied to the Spratly Islands. So if I throw around the term Kalayaan, just know I'm referring to the Philippines' official claim to the Spratly Islands. So that's the top-down perspective that needed to be addressed. But what I try to do again is tease out the everyday geopolitics of this dispute. and that entailed me getting my boots on the ground. I chose the province of Palawan in the Philippines because it's the closest mainland to the disputed islands. Again, these islands are in the middle of the South China Sea. I'm looking at the Spratly Island group. So I conducted semi-structured interviews. I was focusing on fishing communities because I figured they went there, uh, and many of them did that I encountered. I also interviewed, elected officials on a municipal level, NGO workers, activists, like just myriad different community members and stakeholders. I tried to interview local professors from Palawan State University. Um, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but that piece of land oriented from the southwest toward the northeast, that's Palawan. And I was based mostly in Puerto Princesa and Quezon City, and the disputed islands are directly to the west of that sliver of land where I was living for. I was supposed to be there for a year, and it turned into several years because I was locked down during the pandemic. So that's how I tried to tease out the everyday geopolitics of the dispute, if that makes sense. And I just want to share this letter because it's part of my research, my fieldwork experience. One of my biggest failures of the fieldwork was my inability to gain access to the epicenter of the dispute. I wanted to get my boots on the ground in the middle of that disputed area on an island known as Thitu Island in the international community. And that's actually where the civilian Filipino community is living from. They're actually residents of Palawan mostly. They're not indigenous to that island. It's actually part of the Philippine government's performance of sovereignty on the geopolitical international stage. So they give living stipends to these Filipino civilians who live on this far-flung, really uninhabitable island in the middle of this disputed area as sort of this performance of sovereignty, this performance of this. I draw on another scholar, Patricia Seed, who talks about ceremonies of possession. They're essentially settlers to essentially they are, I don't want to use the word pawn, but they are perform part of this broader geopolitical performance for the Philippine state to make claims to that disputed area. And I failed to get there, which is unfortunate. I wanted to get there, I couldn't get there. Um, and this is my official rejection letter from the Department of National Defense there. But I wanted to share this letter because it's part of this broader shift in the political climate in the Philippines at the time. So I was there in 2016 and I met the mayor of Kalayaan. Remember, Kalayaan means the Spratly Islands. Uh, Eugenio Pito Onon, and he's a very friendly guy. He would regularly invite foreign researchers and the media to the disputed areas to garner international sympathy for the Philippines about this dispute. And he personally invited me to go to the island with him in 2016, but I was unable to because I was still dealing with my program at University of Hawaii. By the time I got there in 2017, everything had changed in terms of the political climate of the Philippines. There was a new mayor of Kalayaan, who I was never even able to meet, and there was a new president of the Philippines. So the previous president, Aquino, his approach to this dispute was to garner international sympathy again by inviting journalists and scholars to the disputed area to garner international sympathy for the Philippines' claim to this disputed area and this very complex territorial dispute. Uh, when Rodrigo Duterte was elected to presidency in the Philippines in 2016, I'm not sure if you listened to the news, but he's quite infamous internationally for his war on drugs, quote unquote, war on drugs.
Hmm.
Uh, it was essentially, some people have called it like the killing fields. It was just extrajudicial killings. And I don't have time to delve into that. That's a completely
But
different.
due to his war on drugs, he was just killing a lot of people, you're saying, huh?
Yeah, I mean, or the police had free reign to just murder people in the streets. I
Wow.
was there when he was elected. When he won the election, he didn't even take office yet. Literally overnight, I was in Manila. Overnight, there were just bodies in the street. I didn't see it personally, but it was all over the news. Uh,
Wow.
it was a crazy time. And again, that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about
Sure,
today.
sure, sure.
But yeah,
Just good background though.
In fact, I think he's still wanted by the United Nations International Court in The Hague for war crimes. But I was there when he
Wow.
was elected, and just in terms of my research, when he got elected, he shifted radically in terms of diplomacy, a radical shift from the United States towards China, right? As a kind of a superpower empire allegiance, right? The Philippines was colonized by the United States, uh, a century and a half ago, so it was an official formal colony of the American Empire. Uh, so Duterte tried to change that. I mean, he tried to change the allegiance from the United States in 2016 towards China. So again, it wasn't a good time for me, an American researcher, to just arrive and try to gain access to these sensitive areas. I was invited to do it in 2016 and 2017, like that. Everything changed, and I was no longer able to access that space. So that just kind of gives an extra layer of the changing national dynamics, municipal dynamics that I was navigating, and the geopolitical internationally dynamics of this dispute and how it changed everything. I'm going to go back to this map just simply because it explains the law of the sea. Again, the point of my research was to sort of circumvent as best I can the top-down perspective and do a more grassroots approach to this dispute, tease out who's actually affected on the ground or on the water. However, you cannot talk about this dispute without just delving into the law of the sea. I like it. It's actually fascinating to me. So the law of the sea is the foundation, one of the key components of this dispute. And it was so prior in Western, thought about the seas have historically been thought of as these spaces of lawlessness, these spaces of danger, these spaces devoid of form. They're in flux and movement at all times. Uh, there's peripheral spaces beyond civilization, and also they're resistant to becoming territory. I mean, we don't have time for what territory is even. I'm a political geographer, so I really get into sort of dissecting these concepts and these theories, but land is much more amenable to claims to territory. You can put a
Sure.
sign on it and say, this is mine, or you can draw a line across it, or you can put it on a map and it, at the very least reifies this image that you own that place on this earth. Uh, this ocean space, at least in Western thought historically, was resistant to those things. You can't really put a sign on the sea per se. I mean, you can, but it'll get washed away or somebody will take it. You can try to draw a line on the map, but that was unconventional for millennia, right? Up until the 20th century, there was a radical shift in the way human beings really conceptualized sea space, the relationship between territory and ocean space. And it was largely through the law of the sea. So for the very first time, these different nation states were attempting to make claims, territorial claims to ocean space. Um, and this resulted in the law of the sea. It was decades in the making, this long, grueling negotiation process between myriad nation states on Earth. And it was finally finalized in, that's redundant, finally finalized. It was finalized in 1982, and to this day, I believe around 160 nation states have formally ratified it. The United States, I believe, is one of the few who has not to this day. Through the process of creating the law of the sea, this grueling negotiation, there was three different uh, camps. Uh, there were the superpowers, Soviet Union and the United States. They wanted extremely limited territorial seas because it was part of their empire. They wanted the freedom to have their navies flow everywhere around the world without transgressing international law. I mean, they probably would do it anyway, but they wanted their navies to flow freely around the world without breaking any laws. So
So they just really wanted the oceans to mostly be a highway that was not owned by anyone, kind of
exactly,
thing.
just what they
Yeah.
call it, the freedom of the seas, right? That's the term and the concept that was thrown around with wild abandon and still is. But the freedom, this notion of the freedom of the seas. Uh, there's no, there's no, there's no territory of the sea. So they were against it. The empires, the global superpowers, the American Empire and the Soviet Union were against territory of the sea. The developing coastal states, like for example the Philippines. I don't know the history of the Philippines. I should in relation to the law of the sea, but just in general, the developing coastal states, they wanted expansive territorial seas. They wanted hundreds of miles of territory in the sea because in theory, on paper, that would empower them to protect their natural resources in adjacent waters. And then there were the landlocked states. They don't have a coast, right? So their primary concern was um, the seabed resources, and they wanted sort of this collectively owned natural resources. But that's not really relevant to our discussion necessarily. But for our topic, the law of the sea, there was a compromise in 1982. The law of the sea is a compromise for the superpowers by limiting dramatically the territory of the sea to only 12 nautical miles off the coast of the natural coastline of a nation state. So that appeased the superpowers, the empires of America and the Soviet Union. To appease the interest of the developing coastal states, there were expansive, exclusive economic zones and continental shelf. That's not as pertinent to the discussion, but exclusive economic zones are. So there's a limited 12-mile territorial sea under international law of the sea, and there's this expansive 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Exclusive economic zone is just that. Um, on paper, in theory, under the law of the sea, that's what these blue dots are on the line. Within those blue dots, all the natural resources existing within that space are supposed to be exploited exclusively by the adjacent nation state. So if you look at this map right off the bat, you'll notice I'm focusing on the Spratly Islands. There's 6 different countries claiming the Spratly Islands or the waters, and also there's 5 different nation states physically occupying the Spratly Islands. That group, those gray dots, that represents the Spratly Islands. They exist within the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. So at first glance, you would say, hey, they belong to the Philippines. Uh, it makes sense that they would, but there's other factors. It's not that simple. And I'm no expert. I don't want to claim I'm an expert on international law. I'm certainly no expert, but it's much more complicated than that. Simply because these features exist within the exclusive economic zone does not mean they belong to that country. If it was within the 12 nautical miles, it would. It would be black and white, plain as day. But these features are not within the 12 nautical miles. They're within a 200 mile EEZ of the Philippines. Um, but it essentially is within the backyard of the Philippines, these claimed territories. So that's the top-down perspective of what these different claimant states are. And again, I want to point out, like, this map is a fantasy. This is the state level political elite diplomatic fantasy of what space and territory looks like in the South China Sea, and it's far more complex and messy and cluttered than this map indicates. And I believe that's the next slide. So I did the next slide. There's a delay. Here's the next slide. Can you see those blue and red and orange and pink, white
Yep.
dots?
Yep.
So here's the reality. I made this map. It's an ugly map, but I think I love it. It's a cool map. These are the actual locations, the physical military outpost of 5 claimant states. So 5 different countries actually have physical military occupations on these features. I don't even want to call them islands necessarily, right? Some of them are reefs, some of them are strips of sand, cays. One of them is a rusted World War II era vessel. I'll show an image of that next. So this map just sort of illustrates how cluttered and messy this dispute is. It's unbelievable, right? So rather than these clear, tidy categories of space where there's a clear border and this state owns that and that nation state owns that, it's much more messy, cluttered. And some of these spots are, for example, on Titu Island, that Filipino community that I mentioned, and I hope to talk about this if we have time in the future, one of these days. Um, on Titu Island, there's less than 200 civilians living there, and it's all unsustainable. They're not indigenous there. Most of their resources are shipped in by the Philippine government. Literally, there's overnight, for lack of a better word, there's a reef known as Subi Reef that was claimed by China. I believe it's only 12 miles away from Thitu Island on the horizon. So the Chinese military arrived, and prior to that moment, Subi Reef was a reef barely breaking the surface of the water of the sea. They built an artificial island. They dredged the water, including coral reef, the Chinese military, and they created this artificial island. They literally created territory. And then on top of that, they built a state-of-the-art military base, including missiles, and there's naval war vessels and Coast Guard vessels. And the Coast Guard vessels, it's not the traditional type, they're fitted with ammunition and guns and water cannons. So these Filipino civilians, they could see this state-of-the-art sophisticated military base being constructed on the horizon. So they're overnight they were suddenly living in the shadow of this militarized seascape on Thitu Island. So it's very complex and it's very messy and it's disorienting to the people that live there. And it's ever moving. I always argue that like this dispute, again, in Western thought about the sea, it's always in flux. It's always moving. It's never stagnant. So is its dispute. State perspectives try to claim that space is ordered in a logical uh, sequence, and there's contiguous areas that one country owns and the other owns, but reality on the ground is much more complex, essentially everywhere on Earth, but especially here. This really illustrates it more than anything I'm aware of, how complex territory is. So here's a satellite image of the Sierra Madre. This is this is actually one of the nine Philippine military outposts in the Spratly Islands. So while China has this state-of-the-art military base, the Philippines military deliberately took an old rusted ship from World War II, and they deliberately beached it on this reef in the Spratly Islands, Thomas Reef, and Second Thomas Reef is what it's called. So this is actually a military outpost. This is a performance of sovereignty, a geopolitical performance on the global stage. That yes, the Philippines owns these spaces. So this is an old rusted vessel, and I believe probably half a dozen, definitely less than a dozen Philippine military personnel are stationed on this far-flung rusted vessel in the middle of nowhere at any given time. Um, all their supplies are shipped in. And in the meantime, China has naval vessels and Coast Guard vessels, again, Coast Guard vessels with guns on the horizon, patrolling the waters around, trying to intercept uh, supply vessels, or at the very least, intimidate them. So while the Philippine state this is a performance on the side of the Philippine state, a performance of sovereignty, the Chinese military is doing something similar as well. Uh, they're patrolling the waters in a performance of geopolitical sovereignty in this disputed space as well. This is what it looks like on the ground. I mean, it looks nothing like the maps manufactured by state political elites. So real quick, this is not as important. I'm not going to read all this, but most people, scholars, and the media, they focus on China's claims because of their militarizing it at a far greater speed than the other nation states. But many people might be surprised that Vietnam actually occupies. They could change by now, who knows? But the last time I checked, 21 features, physically occupies 21 features in the Spratly Islands. The Philippines occupies 9. The China occupies 7. So Philippines actually occupies more spots than China in this disputed area. Taiwan has 1. So these are the actual a list of the actual physical occupations in that broader group of islands that are being disputed. Right. Again, right. I can't emphasize this enough. This is in the backyard of the Philippines, the backyard of the province of the Palawan, where I was living for a few years. And this is all unfolding. So I try to look at who's affected on the ground and the water as best I could. I wasn't allowed to go there, so I started interviewing fishers and to get their firsthand experiences. And if in future talks, if we have time, we can delve into that. So remember the term Kalayaan I mentioned earlier?
Yep.
Freedom, freedom land. So this is, so I was living in Puerto Princesa City for years. I'll probably return there in the future. But this is the official Philippine state's claim to the Spratly Islands. It's known as the Kalayaan Island Group. And I'm probably saying Kalayaan with a super thick accent. Uh, I
Oh,
should never,
good.
yeah. I mean, so if any Filipinos watch this, they just might get a kick out of me trying to say that word. Out of all the Tagalog words, that's one I always have difficulty saying, Kalayaan. It's a tongue twister for me, but it's known as the Kalayaan Island Group in the Philippines, and it's based on. I briefly mentioned there was this colorful Filipino entrepreneur um, decades ago who went out there to harvest guano, actually. And when he went out there, he just kind of declared this as his own sort of nation. It's called Freedom Land. And then in 1978, I believe, Ferdinand Marcos, the president turned dictator of the Philippines, he officially declared this space as the Kalayaan Island Group. And today, this is the Philippines' claim to the Spratly Islands under the law of the sea. So this hexagon here, these are the precise. I made this map. It's ugly, but I'm proud of it anyway. Uh, these are the actual physical occupations, Philippine occupations in the disputed islands. And these white lines, this hexagon, are the precise coordinates outlined by the Philippine state in accordance with the law of the sea, in accordance with their interpretation of the law of the sea, the Kalayaan Island Group. And again, so this is, I'm always emphasizing, I wanted to look at this project at multiple scales. The official state perspective, the state imagining, the state fantasy, and the lived experiences on the ground. And they contradict each other tremendously. So this is the Philippine state's imagining of the Spratly Islands. If you look at it closely, because I argue throughout my research, like discourse, words have power. Maps also have power. Maps convey a specific image of reality that oftentimes don't correlate with the reality of lived experiences. We don't have time to get into that now, but that's how I approach my research as well. And this is an official Philippine perspective of what the Spratly Islands looks like. The reality, of course, as you're guessing, is far more complicated. Like I might sound redundant, but I really want to nail that down. This is the hexagon, the official coordinates of the Kalayaan Island Group, but these are the actual military occupations within the claim of the Philippine state. So there's actually military outposts within the Philippines claim to the Spratly Islands underneath the law of the sea. So again, just to emphasize, I'm at the danger of being redundant. I don't care, Landon. I just want to nail down that this is an incredibly complex dispute, right? And the reality on the ground in the water contradicts tremendously what state elites would have you believe. And that
What
was a point
state
of my research.
elites would have us believe, you said.
Exactly. I mean, well, that's
Crazy.
what maps are. Maps are discourse. Maps have power. Maps have messages embedded in them, in either explicitly or implicitly.
Yeah, they have an agenda.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's not, even if you're not even aware of it subconsciously, right?
Yeah,
Our words have meaning and they affect reality.
yeah.
Like what I'm saying now is completely. I mean, I don't. We're opening a can of worms here. We don't have time for that. But yeah, words have power, and so do maps. I think of maps and cartography as discourse in all my research. So here were the overall driving questions of my research project, and they're very broad, of course, because I wanted to be able to adapt them to the lived reality of field work in the Philippines. So the meta question was, I would say, pretty straightforward, simple. What are the geopolitical consequences of the construction of new Chinese islands in the South China Sea for communities in the Philippines? So again, I briefly mentioned, hopefully in the future, if we have time, we could talk about this, but China's building islands out of thin air, right? So this I wanted to look at how that is specifically affecting Filipinos.
And real quick, explain a little bit about what you mean when you say China is building islands out of thin air.
Well, yeah, like I said, for the example I would use earlier was
Oh, yeah,
Sumi.
yeah, yeah. With the
Yeah, it was a reef not even breaking the surface of the water at high tide, and then now there's a state-of-the-art military base that Filipino civilians are suddenly living in the shadow of. So that's what I mean.
and you said you think you said earlier, they China has ships that are like dredging up like coral from the coral reefs and like making it into an actual island from a reef kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, because this is actually on the periphery of the Coral Triangle Initiative as well. And I should brush up on that. Maybe I can brush up on it in our future talks. But right off the top of my head, it's this coral reef hotspot, um, which includes the Philippines, that are different scholars and scientists feel as though this needs to be preserved at all costs for the communities that live there, and also probably the health of the climate or the world in general. So, right on the periphery of this highly sensitive ecological system, China, there's reports. I didn't see it firsthand, but China's dredging coral reef and using the material to build islands out of. So it's not ideal in terms of conservation by any stretch of the imagination. I forget where. I believe I was at an East-West Center talk, and I forget who brought it up, but one of the scholars there, they were actually in an airplane watching it happen. Um, oh, actually, like even the Chinese fishers are harvesting giant clams. It's all these things are devastating to the ecosystem, which billions of people rely on for food, right? So this is connected to uh, fish commodity chains, and it's a mess, right? I don't want to sound dramatic, but it's a mess. So that's one of the things that are happening, and I focus on in my research. Then again, like how does the military presence, China's military presence, affect Filipino fishing vessels and the fishing community? That's what I was there to find out firsthand. How does the law of the sea impact the Spratly Island dispute? And as research unfolds, that I quickly became aware that that was less important for my research project. That question there, um, but this one is very important, at least from a theoretical perspective. Is how should China's island construction be theorized? What does this mean for critical geopolitics and from a political geography perspective or social science? People debate what is territory. Uh, this is fertile ground for investigating or theorizing these different concepts because these categories are being created from thin air, for lack of a better word. Territory, sovereignty, militarized spaces. So, from a theoretical perspective, just for pushing the bounds of theorizations of power and space and territory and boundaries and borders, what does this mean? Like, how do we conceptualize what's happening? Because it's unprecedented to us on a certain level, even in the physical realm, but in the theoretical realm. But again, the overall driving force, because while I was doing my looking through the existing research while I was starting this project, could not find anything about who's affected on the ground, except for some reporters in the Philippines were looking at Filipino fishers. Perhaps that's where I got the idea. I'm not sure. You know how those things work. Uh, but I wanted to look at who is directly affected by the dispute. Who are the ordinary communities, the people living there on the periphery at the very least, are affected by this dispute. And that's what I try to do as best I could with this broader research project. So my broader research projects, I'll get nerdy here, but I think it's cool, to me at least. So the broader thematic arc of my research project, it wasn't, I didn't mean this at the outset. This is kind of what it became, was how was space imagined? Uh, Territory is imagined solid to a solid fluid hybrid. So again, I'm tracing, and that's just how my research was structured. And hopefully we can talk about this in the future, step by step. But again, my broader project traces how Kalayaan, the Philippines claim, uh, you know, appeared as an undefined, vague idea for elected state officials toward built materiality and increased militarization. So it's very much the process of increased state legibility to build materiality. And what I say is a solid fluid hybrid. That's what exists now. And hopefully we can get into that sometime in the future. But this is the broader thematic arc of my dissertation and my research project.
Hmm.
Oh, so one again, this is one tiny little anecdote. I don't know if we have time, but
Yeah. Go ahead.
um, so again, like these stories are sort of overlooked in the broader research on the project. Back back in 2020, I was actually there in the Philippines during the pandemic and the lockdown. So this is a satellite image of Situ Island. That should be more clear. This is where the Filipino civilians are living. They're not indigenous to that spot, but they're shipped there, and most of their supplies are shipped there. You'll see to the west, the furthest to the west of that image, that's a landing strip, and that section of the landing strip actually fell into the sea. So it's sort of symbolic of the Philippines claim, like it's a developing country trying to make claim to space against China. Um, anyway, so this was part of a prior to this moment, they spent, I believe it was 5 billion US dollars. 5 billion or 5 million. It was a heavy amount of money to build a ramp, a landing ramp. You see it in the image to the right, uh, to help them with their resupply vessels. Prior to the development of the construction of this ramp, to resupply the community living there, they actually had to station a supply vessel offshore and ferry it in on a rubber raft, right? So they built this raft to streamline that process. But this was very much a performance. This is an elected official from the Department of National Defense uh, went there, and you see the blue bows. This was like a moment he invited the media to go with him. This was again a performance on the world stage, or at least that was what it was orchestrated to be. Uh, so when they arrived, and again a performance to get, construct the image that this belonged to the Philippines without dispute. It's incontestable that anybody else can claim this spot. So they arrived as this performance. They invited the media, and then when they all turned on their cell phones, the media, and including the elected officials. I'm not sure if you've traveled abroad, but when you travel abroad and you have a layover in an international airport, you tap into that country's infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure, and almost always you receive a text message saying, "Hey, welcome to Japan," or "Welcome to this country," or "Welcome to that country." So these diplomats and the media arrived on this far-flung island, claiming it to be the Philippines. And they arrived and opened their cell phones and they received those texts saying, "Hey, welcome to China, welcome to Vietnam." What happened was the Philippine telecommunications infrastructure is so obsolete, particularly back then, that it didn't really exist. It was down for some reason. I don't really understand the background, but they tapped into China's infrastructure. They tapped into the infrastructure that was on Subi Reef, I presume. So an embarrassing moment for these diplomats. Again, it was they were supposed to representing this image that this belongs to the Philippines, and they invited these reporters, and they set foot on this land that's supposed to be the Philippines, and they received a message saying, "Welcome to China." But this sort of uh, illustrates as one example of how this dispute is unfolding through telecommunications networks. It's unfolding through. There's even tourist vessels. There's fish and marine seafood commodity chains. There's multiple perspectives and aspects of this dispute. It's unfolding for the people living here on this island, as well as unfolding for the Filipino fishers that they need to evade Chinese Coast Guard vessels. I interviewed some of those who um, they were intimidated. The Chinese Coast Guard vessels shot water cannons in their direction, right? So these are, I guess, to sum it up, just in a roundabout way, is everybody's talking about this dispute, or they were. The majority of people were talking about it from the top down, and I wanted to do it from the bottom up, provide a grassroots lens of what this dispute actually looks like for the people, for the Filipino soldiers that are based on these far-flung military outposts in the middle of this area. I interviewed some of those guys. Um, so that's what my research tried to be very much, and hopefully we can talk about this in the future if we can schedule a time. Um, and again, just honing in this dispute. Here's an image of this is a port in southern Palawan in the province of Palawan in Quezon, municipality Quezon. So this is you know these fishes are tied to international markets, international seafood commodity chains, and it's also they're ensnared in this broader geopolitical dispute, this territorial dispute, whether they like it or not. And I try to focus on the everyday geopolitics of the Spratly Islands, the everyday geopolitics of maritime Southeast Asia, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So I mean,
And
I
it,
think we're short on time, but if we can
no,
talk
no.
about
If there's anything else you want to say, go ahead and wrap it up. You're good. We got some
no,
time.
that's it. Like I don't want to start a tangent because if we
No, no, you're good. So, yeah, we'll continue this in episodes going forward in the future. There's a lot more to Dylan's dissertation that we want to cover. But again, to emphasize, as you've said before, I think, um, this dispute is on the very cutting edge of social science theories of territory and sovereignty,
I argue with
correct?
you, I very much believe that because like I said, in all of Western thought, the open seas were thought of these spaces resistant to territory. Up until the 20th century, and the law of the sea was created, and then suddenly China's creating these islands out of ocean space. So what does that mean for human beings and the way we conceptualize oceans, maritime spaces? What does it mean for the lived experiences of these people, but also just from a theoretical perspective? What does this mean for theories of sovereignty, theories of territory, theories of borders, right? And that's kind of what I try to explore throughout my larger project, if that makes sense. So I think it is very much the cutting edge of social science theory, at least as a political geography perspective. Critical geopolitics for sure. And we can get into some of that. Well, we will if we have time in the future. I'll tease through some of those ideas if you want.
Be awesome. Love it. Thank you, Dr. Dylan Beatty, for being a guest on the show. Again, we're going to continue breaking down his complex dissertation in future episodes. But again, my very close personal friend, Dr. Michael Beatty, Dr. Dylan Michael Beatty, thanks again for joining us. And yeah, he'll be a guest again on future episodes breaking down his dissertation further.
Thanks, Landon. Yeah, like I said, we've talked for years, just kind of throwing around ideas, and this is a lot. Like mostly our talks aren't this formal, but they kind of are. We throw around some cool ideas, so it's cool that we're recording some of it. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you and I hope we can do it again in the near future.
we'll definitely do it again.
All
Thanks
right.
again, Dr. Beatty. We'll see you later, man.
Okay. See you.